Hi, I'm Vivian Siskin.
And, and I'm Sarah McIntyre.
Welcome to Coffee with Vivian and Sara. And I guess we have to start out with our coffee. Here we go. Here's our coffee. I got a Southwest vibe this morning. Yeah.
Nice. I couldn't remember my last coffee mug of choice. I really have only a limited option, but I went with a tiny one
That's
to
very
today.
cool. Yeah, we're both
Yeah,
sort of ceramic-y today. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we're waking up with our coffee. And the topic for today is going to be around action and change. And it's a very broad topic. But just to give you an idea why we came up with this topic, and I was chatting with Sarah after she came back from a community event with the stuttering community. And I asked her what popped, right? I said, what popped for you? And this is what she said to me. She said, you don't need to feel great or confident to take action. And I thought it was such an interesting comment. Um, and then I thought, well, what do you need to take action? And then that sort of leads into a whole thing like what motivates change. And then we started saying, is it different at the beginning of the journey? Is it different at the end of the journey? So, Sarah, tell me a little bit more on why that popped for you and what that might mean for you or for anybody else that you might have heard it from.
I think this really spoke to me within some conversation with parents and also those who stutter, and then also really kind of spoke to my own personal experience in thinking about that crux of change, thinking about when you're deciding conceptually or cognitively that you might want to take a step in a direction or take a risk or move beyond where you are, or you just want to make a change that you know is going to require doing, but then the struggle that we experience with maybe waiting until it feels good in order to then take that risk or change, or expecting that we have feelings that are positive or entirely confident or excited, when in reality a lot of the things we do in stuttering and within this journey is uncomfortable for a period of time in order to create that change. And I think what resonated so much was that when you're making a change, it's not actually going to feel good, and that's an indication that you're moving beyond where you are. And so how we support people and ourselves to understand and accept the feeling while deciding still that we can take action that's in alignment with our goal or where we're hoping to be, so that two things can be true, which I love to think about in a lot of different elements within stuttering, and I know you do as well.
Yeah, and it sort of makes me think, you know, I mean, I think feeling positive about change can actually motivate change, but I'm also thinking about so many people who ask me the question, do you have to hit rock bottom to make change? Because so many people, when they tell their stories, if you listen to the stories of people's journeys, very often they say, I hit rock bottom. In other words, I couldn't stand it anymore. The anxiety of communication or the mental gymnastics of whether I stutter or whether I mask, so much of that it was, or I couldn't function anymore. Um, I'm wondering if that change comes from a place of um, that's sort of a negative feeling, right? So maybe sometimes change can come from the place of feeling you have nowhere else to go but to change. So I guess does it have to come from extremes? Does it have to come from feeling very positive or also feeling very negative? I'm just thinking maybe the problem is the people in the middle who are like, I'm not feeling positive or negative. And so that it's harder to change because, as I always say, it's good to keep stuttering at the top of the problem list. And when it drops on your problem list, it means you're making progress. But then if it drops on your problem list, you don't think about it as much during the week, and then you don't risk. You don't have it in your mind to plan something that's going to make you feel, like you said, uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So maybe I'm just thinking right now, maybe the problem is in the middle.
I think so. I mean, and I think there's maybe two perspectives here, that kind of global state or readiness of what's that saying, where the pain of change is no longer greater than the pain of staying the same. And
Yeah.
so that speaks for sure to people who are experienced maybe rock bottom or maybe close to, in terms of being ready to take on something that's hard. But also, I think in the instantaneous moment of wanting to go for something and it feeling um it feeling like something that might be scary or might conjure shame or fear. So I don't know, calling a doctor's office to navigate a bill that they sent you, and you know that you're going to need to be assertive and say what you're going to say. You might have this inherent feeling of maybe dread or fear, worry or shame of what are they going to think if, or I can't stutter too much, and which we want to shift in those beliefs, but that feeling before going for it feels and yet if we listen to that, then we're going to remain where we are. But understanding we can accept that and still act, I think, is something that is tricky to instill and to motivate, because who wants to feel uncomfortable, and then yet still act in alignment with where they're hoping to be.
Yeah. And I guess we're talking about change in terms of challenges and risking. But there's also this notion, I don't know even where to begin with this because we have a lot of ways we can go, but the notion of, for me, change, the real change takes place in the low fear situations,
Mhm.
where you're not, you're not worried about so much. It's safer in those safe, we're listening to your warnings and not going out of, not going, too far out of the safety net. Um, because you can actually be present when you're making those changes and they can take hold and last. Um, I was just thinking about what are some of the barriers for change, because there's a lot of them. And, we think about our clients. You can also talk about your own experiences and as well as your clients. But what most of what we do in helping and supporting our clients in this journey is helping them to meet challenges, make changes, take action, action-oriented approach to, for me, for acceptance and change. And so what are the barriers? And the first barrier that I think of is fear, intense fear.
Mhm.
Fear of, um, what if everything falls apart? I have this very delicate balance between escape behaviors and avoidance behaviors and roles that I take and how I navigate work environments, let's say, if work is the highest feared situation. Suppose I change and that all falls apart. Like, I could lose my job. I could, and the client might remind me, these are real things here. I need money. I need to work. And so there's huge fear. And I think, besides fear of loss of control, there's fear of just like feeling the feelings that you were talking about. There's
Mhm.
so much fear in change. And so even if you can sort of look at the pros and cons of taking risks, fear can be overwhelming.
Mhm.
I'm wondering what you think about that, or even losing your sense of self. Like, this is who I am. This is how I approach communication. Um, if that's all stripped away, and again, it's sort of catastrophic in some of our clients' minds. If that's all stripped away, what will be, how will I survive? How will I cope? And that's really scary.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm flashing back to my own journey, and I think the fear of this new identity was probably the biggest fear that I experienced. Well, how am I going to go from being, perceptually, or what I thought was perceptually fluent or typical speaker who didn't stutter, to everyone, to then being someone who identified as someone who stuttered and allowed themselves to physically show stuttering? What sort of consequences might occur? Will I get a second date? Will I get that second round interview? Will I actually get the job over someone who doesn't stutter? Will I feel confident about myself? And how does that identity component really fit? You have this fear because it's unknown to you when you're coming from a place of masking and coping in a way through life that you are hoping that the world doesn't see this, and you are relatively successful in some cases, and specifically mine. And so the fear is greater because I don't know any differently, and I've really reinforced that belief for so long, where I had that if I were to, then yep. And then when time elapses, it was just like rock hard and solid. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
So I'm wondering, when you're looking at pros and cons, for example, for taking the risk, or, when you're evaluating that risk early on, what could be the pro? I mean, you're in the moment. I mean, certainly sitting with your clinician and talking about in the abstract, the pros, um, can be conceptual, could be, a future you, these outcomes that you want. But in the moment, what could possibly be on the pro side? I'm just wondering how that ever balances out that somebody decides to take the risk.
I think it's specific to that person and what might be important to them that they might not be doing. I mean, and it can be trivial. In my experience, it was ordering coffee. And I know that sounds really, trivial in the grand scheme of things. And it was ordering what I actually wanted to. I had only ordered things that began with an S sound for a really long time. And I, enough was enough to even wrap my head around that I might actually receive an order of something different. And so I think I got to that place of, well, it's going to be worth it regardless of the discomfort, in order to get that outcome. Likewise, in like a grander scheme of things, I think um, friendships and relationships and dating, feeling like you're not showing your true self, and you're containing what you're saying into a box in order to continue to skate by. The idea of showing yourself and saying what you want to say and cracking jokes and being a little bit more you, that's felt really appealing too. And so I think there was this, what I know I would want, and what I knew that would be great to feel and experience. But to get there, it was like, well, I got to do something different. I can't just think about it.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the client who might say, um, sure, it's a word substitution. It's a little postponement or an everybody does stuff like that. Why would I change some of those things? Those actually save me in the moment and actually give me control. Um, and, you know, I think weighing those, in other words, if you don't use those things, what does it mean? Suppose you decide not to do the word substitution, or suppose you decide not to postpone that moment of disfluency, and you end up on the sound, stuttering. Those feelings and potential in the mind, whether they're real or not, potential listener thoughts and judgments, um, that is so powerful for the person. it doesn't, it seems like it would be overpowering the risk of letting go of something so small, like, why is it hurting anything?
Yes. When you put it like that, what am I
You
doing?
know, it's like, it's just a little postponement, like,
Just
get
just a
over
little.
it. Yeah, it's
Uh,
funny. Yeah.
I think I needed to know what the path forward looked like. So the stepping stones of it. So if I wasn't equipped with what's my why or what's the purpose here of doing this thing and saying what I want to say, which is going to create an visible stutter. Um, why do that? What is the path forward then? And then what's the potential gain from the pain eventually? I
Yeah.
think I really needed to know that the discomfort was worth it in
Yeah.
that moment.
And I think what you're saying is so important. I was just thinking, as I was talking, I was saying, well, what would I do? What do I do? And just as you said, you go back to the rationale.
Mhm.
And for me, it's going back with the client, going through the rationale of what their values are, why they're there, what they hope to accomplish, and why they started the journey to begin with.
Mhm.
Because the idea of, that yes, these are all things that I want, but the work to get them might not be something I can do on a daily basis. And, days go by and I don't do any changing. I don't do any action because of the fear, because I don't want to think about it, because of a number of reasons, not wanting to um, just be in that moment of feeling those feelings or thinking those thoughts. It's easier to brush it under the rug. Um, and I think you're so right about going back to the rationale of what it's all about. And I think clients who have been in therapy for a long time still need to sometimes revisit what
Mhm.
the journey is about, what the rationales, what is the intent of all of these things, and how they're going to reach their desired outcomes and values.
Mhm.
And maybe, yeah, I'm just thinking maybe that has to be more a part of the idea of change for some people who are stuck.
Yes. And
Yeah,
revisiting it. I love that you emphasize that because what we're assuming is the intention and we're assuming is the lens in which the client might be going about something, might not be. And it's so easy. It's like a vortex or quicksand for those of us who are so used to orienting our brain to showing stuttering as a failure in our previous pre-journey lives, right? And so it's so quick to just slide back into that place. And I think checking in with that intentionality. And then I like one thing I like to do a lot, and I know you do, is to look ahead and to look in the rear view too.
yeah,
So remember where you are now, put it in place with where you're going and what might come next and why we're not quite there yet, but we'll get there and what it might take to get there. And then to remember where you've been so that these some of this is a little bit of a marathon rather than a sprint, a lot of it. And it's about chipping away at consistent, sustainable change.
yeah. And not only revisiting rationale and values and outcomes, the big picture, the road,
Mhm.
but also stepping back sometimes. Sometimes you've stretched your comfort zone and you can't sustain it,
Mhm.
but you've given yourself high expectations for continuing to make those leaps and bounds, especially if you've gotten a lot of reinforcement in therapy or from the group that you've made so much progress, look where you've gone. And sometimes you've gone into an unsafe place. And so safety is really something that I like to talk about with my clients. If they're not feeling safe when they're risking, they have to step back and do it again and find a place where they can do it safely. And they, feeling like, am I going backwards? Am I am I in the remedial stage here? You know, like I don't want to go backwards. And it's not going back, it's lateral. It's lateral. It's spreading that comfort to more and more contexts before you move ahead. And I find myself doing that more than ever, where somebody wants to go ahead. What's next? What's next? And even in group, they'll hear somebody else doing something that's a little more risky. Maybe somebody's, you know, in a different place on the journey and they go, oh, I want to do, of course you want to do that, but step back and get yourself comfortable where you are. And that includes, you know, to be more specific, that includes like doing this with more people, bringing more people into your support group, people bringing people into your box, as we like to say, um, and evaluating what you're feeling and what you're thinking in those situations before pushing yourself to do something harder. So I think that you know, action doesn't have to be risking all the time. Action um, could be sort of walking the walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you took the risk last week. You're not, you're like, I'm done.
One and done. That's
I
it.
did that. I ordered my coffee. I'm completely done with that. But it's like, okay, now you ordered your coffee. What other words do you want to say in that coffee shop? Can you do it with a bystander behind you? Um, do you want to do it with the unfriendly barista?
Yes.
Can
A
you
little
know,
louder.
yeah, a little until you feel safer. And I think drilling down and finding assignments that are within your comfort zone, but still moving you in the action-oriented direction, moving you toward change, is something that we don't always think about. We're always trying to like, what's next? What's next?
Mhm.
I'm lucky that I have clients who say, we're going, that's too much, Vivian. We're going, you know, no, somebody else, not me. I'm going backwards a little bit. And not, but what I find is that, and this one particular client always says, when I say do one more thing, just do one more thing. You've done A, B, C, do one more thing. He always says, I'm going to do one more thing, but less. And that has meaning.
Mhm.
Do one
Mhm.
more thing, but less. And it doesn't feel as scary.
Mhm.
So not stretching yourself, keeping yourself safe, but still doing.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of an analogy or visual, like when you're changing the gear and you're driving and you're accelerating, and then it kind of pumps back to sustain itself. You're going forward, but you really have to make sure that you're solidifying that experience.
Yeah.
I This is not my own, probably from you, I don't know, but thinking about thinking about what we're doing, kind of like mini experiments. We How big of a sample size would make up a solid, strong experiment or study, not just an N of one, right? We have to increase our sample size in order to really gauge or to notice a modulation or change in how we feel, kind of going back to that feeling and yet acting. And I think, the feelings sort of dial back, while they don't need to be a significant feeling. They could be a subtle, like, oh, I don't
Yeah.
know about this, as they should be.
Yeah. And you just made me think also of, you know, encouraging a client to um, imagine a feeling is also highly, you know, it's an action to start thinking about what would happen. So the assignment of giving permission for somebody to think something, I think is a really powerful assignment for people who are not ready to do something or feel like, they know the next step is like, there's no way they're going to say any other word like in the coffee shop besides the words they say. a good assignment for that person. And maybe there's people listening now who, yeah, that's me. I'm not about to get rid of my word substitutions in the coffee shop, but imagine this is an action in terms of giving permission. People don't think of that as an action, but it is. You walk into the coffee shop and you give the barista permission to think that they just met a person who stutters. Whether or not you're going to show anything, whether or not you stutter, whether you don't, whether you use substitutions, whether you would use avoidances, whether you're playing a role, you just give permission for somebody to know you're a person who stutters. And sometimes the assignment might be, um, you're going to know it's a success because you walked out of there and that person had permission to know that they were talking to a person who stutters. And that's a really powerful assignment, I find, because then people don't feel like they have to show stuttering, go into that reactivity of I'm actually showing stuttering, or they don't have to give up um, a protective device yet. But I love that. That's just one of my
Me
favorite
too.
assignments. Yeah.
I mean, similarly, just getting to know what it is you're thinking and feeling in some of those moments. And I
Yeah.
think it's hard because on one hand, we emphasize this action orientation to change. And so there becomes a good bit of correlation with the actual doing. And I think really reinforcing the doing as also some getting to know doing, some cognitive learning, just checking in with ourselves, and that being equally part of the doing piece too. And so I love that, giving permission and also giving yourself permission to tune in and label what it is you might be thinking or feeling in a situation. And that's a win.
Yeah. And it makes me also think about the duality of giving yourself credit for the action, but also embracing the thoughts, as you were saying, you evaluate, embracing the thoughts that, yeah, but, those yeah, but thoughts. Like I ordered, I said the word I wanted to when I ordered that coffee, but I struggled and I got a pity look. And so all of the buts that come afterwards, if you can um, hold on to the success and at the same time embrace those thoughts that you're having because they're real. Yes, you got a pity look. That didn't feel good. Yes, you struggled. That didn't feel good. And so again, the feelings and thoughts that are coming and allow them to be there and embrace them, but don't give up on that credit for that action. I think that's really hard to do.
Really hard to do. I'm thinking in my head as you're saying that, like, what do you what do people need in that moment to validate what it is that they did do, and then take on the but, etc., and put it in its place. I And it comes down to you're probably not going to feel good because you're adding the buts in there. And how do you navigate that from a clinician standpoint?
Yeah. I think what I hear myself telling somebody is to keep your eye on the target and allow the noise in the room just to dance around you. And there will be noise in the room,
Mm.
but you can't take away an action that was a success. You can't, there's no way that the noise is going to take away that progress you made by doing that action, by making that change, and valuing your ability to do it.
I'm writing that
Yeah.
down. There will
Yeah.
be noise in the room. I can't, I know we're recording, but I can't resist because I'm
I don't
using
know.
it.
We're chatting here. It doesn't really matter. You're drinking
There will
coffee.
be
Yeah.
noise in
All
the
of
room. I
that.
really like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
having sharing in a group context too with that, I think
Oh,
is
yeah.
so can be so beneficial.
Yeah. Um, what else? I'm trying to think of other ways. We're hoping that, some of these videos will be helpful for clinicians and for people who stutter as well. And I'm thinking, other things that might help somebody when they're stuck or something that might motivate action. And what comes to mind, and I think we don't think about this enough, um, of course, group therapy is really helpful, like you just mentioned, Sarah, and bringing up group therapy. But there's a lot of people who, for whatever reasons, are not in group therapy. They're afraid of it, or they prefer not to be, or it's not available, or a clinician does not have a group, but they have individual therapy. So the aspect of community and mentorship, I think, is so valuable. Maybe I think it's more valuable because I don't stutter, and maybe it's not as valuable because you're the natural community. But for a clinician who doesn't stutter like me, I love to create, to be a matchmaker and
Mhm.
create matchmaking little duos of people who can mentor each other informally. I'll email a client and say, would you like to do some mentoring of a new client who, has a little bit of your common journey in their story. And my reactions, the reactions that I get from clients, they not only are they delighted to do it, but they feel honored to do it. And if they've made progress and they they're grateful for the changes that they made and how it's changed their life, they are so excited to talk to someone who's in a different place on the journey. So I think mentorship is really
Yes.
important. I just want people to know, yeah, you can, it's not therapy. It's just here's a buddy you can talk to. And
Mhm.
in the world of Zoom, it's easy these days to do that. It
Yeah.
was harder years ago, but when you had to meet in person.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that's a really important one.
I
And
love that matchmaker. I
yeah.
played matchmaker this week too. And I think I'll share this story because I think, you know, the place of readiness, getting creative on our end and meeting clients where they might be in that. So these young people in particular, the new client, I know would not be ready yet, and has said not quite ready yet to meet some other young people. But the curiosity when inquiring a little bit about my story, the curiosity when we're kind of imagining what other young people might do, you can tell the seeds are there, and you just have to decide how much water to put down at the moment. And so I paired this young person up with someone who might themselves not consider themselves ready or at the place yet to be a mentor. And you know, I suspected wouldn't have been ready to join the session either, or even record a little bit, but we've been asking each other 2 questions each week back and forth, and they have a lot of shared interest. And so we I I collect each response, and I think the next stage will be probably just a quick record, like, hey, how's it? I actually just wonder if we want to record our responses this week. I think that could be cool to see each other face to face, but
I
just the
love the way you're
matchmaking
breaking this
sequence.
down. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love the way this is like being broken down because it's sort of like it's moving closer to the fear in such manageable steps that how many it's sort of I used to say how many ways can you slice a Skittle? I can cut it into 16 pieces, when you want to give a tiny bit of reinforcement in the old days when we were giving reinforcements with Skittles.
I didn't know where you were going with the Skittle thing at first, but now I do.
You don't want to, you want to give one Skittle for
Yeah.
16 responses.
Mhm.
But the idea that you can break something down to tiny, tiny steps that we don't think about, where let's just get curious and then let's ask a question. Then let's put a voice to it. I mean, you still haven't had the chance, you don't have to meet anybody yet.
Mhm.
And so I love the build up to it. Sometimes we do a similar kind of thing with just doing games, like a game night, where we
Mhm.
bring some young people together, and they don't talk about stuttering unless somebody brings it up, but they're just playing games online, and they sort of listen to somebody talk and they go, "Oh, that person stutters." Yeah. So and it's a little less threatening. But I love the whole idea of gradually moving into these situations, even into mentorship, like you're talking about.
Mhm.
I love the whole matchmaking thing. Um, what else are ways, do you think, um, to if someone is sort of stuck and not making change? Trying to think of other things that we do. Maybe we can put out some other ideas for clinicians.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, I have one,
okay.
or maybe a situation to pose. I'm not sure I have the absolute solution, but say you have a client who takes a super big risk on their own, and it kind of like the wheels fell off sort of thing. It was not a good experience for them. They weren't really equipped or ready to or prepared for what might happen or what the outcome might be, and how to sort that within the path of the journey yet. And so they're coming to the session really defeated, and because they took such a big step there, feeling like they're diminishing some of their previous growth or steps that they've taken. How do you navigate something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Well, obviously, I would begin by, validating that it felt like crap.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was not a good feeling, and it didn't feel like a success, and certainly that's true. Um, but also sort of reframing it a little bit in terms of what risk is all about.
Mhm.
And we don't always hit it right when we predict the pros and cons of taking risks and what you're risking. So I often ask my clients to talk about when you're taking a risk, what are you risking? And I encourage them to include everything, even the exaggerated things that are probably not going to happen. They're going to slam a door in my face. They're going to say, you're going to walk away. Well, I lose eye contact, things that are not likely going to happen, but just to make predictions and to brainstorm these predictions on both positive and negative sides when you take a risk. And one of the things that I usually say is, if you're going to take this risk, you have to be prepared for all of these things to happen. And how would you feel if someone, you know, made fun of you or whatever it was, that someone mocked you, or whatever was the worst thing? I have a client who says it'll be curtains. And I said, suppose the curtain comes down, the curtain's going to come down.
Yeah.
Um, are you prepared for that? And let's talk about how you are going to process that if it happens in
Mhm.
advance. And if they are willing to do it as long as that won't happen, they go, well, that probably won't happen, so I'll do it. No, 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 no. We have to be prepared for that to happen. And if they're not, let's change the risk a little bit. There's too many when there's aspects of the risk that seem too dangerous. It is too dangerous. And again, safety, safety, safety. So how can we adjust the risk that you're taking so that all of the predicted risks that you're taking, you know how to handle, or you can plan how to handle it, and even though they may not feel good.
Mhm.
So that you don't get like this client got blown away by, just got derailed. And so I think it comes, the prep is more important, I think.
Yeah.
That would be my response, is preparation for challenge and risk and action.
Yeah.
As we can team together to prepare. And then when you come back and evaluate it, um, we have something to look back on. These are the things that you predicted. And one of the things you predicted was that, and it happened. Wow, you
Yeah.
are right on target. You know yourself.
Right. Right. And if it was an unplanned risk,
Yeah.
uh, one of the things that I've done recently was to actually put pen to paper and map out where that risk sort of it falls or is in relation to what has been within reach recently and then what's between. And I think visually seeing it down and seeing how many things might come in that sustainable climb to get to a place where you might experience that differently can be pretty powerful
Yeah.
in seeing, because it can put our tendency, and I don't want to lump people who stutter all in this category, but I think many of us can be overachievers in some way and overcompensators and always striving for more, whether it is trying to overcompensate for the fact that we stutter, or it's just this inherent drive too, that you can so quickly feel like, well, I should be able to do that. So let me just go for it. And so I think that mapping visually and having a little bit of space to reflect on that, that was a really powerful experience too.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of working with the client with the visual mapping to sort of sort that out. One of the things you just said also made me think of something, that the experience of, what you experience when you take action. And the idea that how it is experienced can be completely different if whether it's planned or unplanned. In other words, whether you're in the role of person who stutters, here I go back to role theory. Sorry, everybody. It's just like
It's important. Bring it
to
back.
grab
Bring it back.
it. Yeah. If you're in the role of person who stutters and you are enacting that role and you spontaneously take a risk, if you show more stuttering than you had planned or more struggle than you had hoped for, um, there's more resiliency there because you're in the role of person who stutters. And the shame that you experience, or whatever other feelings you might experience, disappointment or um, guilt that you're not further along, or whatever it is, like you mentioned, those feelings are very different than if you're taken off guard and you're going in as a fluent person, trying to be as fluent as you can be, hoping not to stutter, and all of that occurs. That puts you in a place of feeling failure as opposed to feeling success that you risked. And so the exact same situation where you go in and struggle the exact same amount in the way that you didn't want to is interpreted completely different, whether you're going in with the mindset of identity as a person who stutters, or the mindset of holding up my identity as a fluent person.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
I love, yeah. So there's
Yeah.
so many nuances in how we can counsel our clients in preparing for these risks and taking actions, not only in terms of um, moving into risk, the approach drive, so to speak, but also how we come in terms of identity.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that proactive versus reactive piece and the expectations we have, and even talking those through. So, what's realistic? What's going to be the experience in some of these reactive scenarios? What's the difference then in the times where you're planning? And I know that you talk a good bit about planning not just what you're doing, but planning to feel.
Mhm.
And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think, as I just said, I think that the same feeling, whether it be frustration, whether it be shame, whether it be um, guilt, and as people who've been on the journey for a long time feel a lot of guilt, like you said, I should be able to do this by now.
Mm.
Like A, B, and C, they can do it. Why can't I
Yeah.
do it? Let's talk
Right.
about them. Um, and so comparing yourself to others, or I should be further along, that's a big one. That I should be further along, you know. The feelings that are felt um, is, I think they're completely different experiences. If you anticipate and plan to feel them and embrace them and bring them to you, as opposed to experiencing them at a time when you don't want to and you push them away and you fight them.
Mhm.
And it's so different. In other words, I'm going to go into this, we call it shame busting. We've talked about this before. I'm going to go into this situation and I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to embrace the shame that I feel. And
Mhm.
so the success isn't doing the risk. The success is embracing the shame. So wait for it. Wait for it. I think this is it. This is shame. Ooh, okay. Feeling it.
Mhm.
And it is so powerful for people who can plan. You have to plan. You're not going to be able to, you're going to go to your automatic when you're doing this spontaneously. You're going to go to your automatic. It's like, I don't want to feel this. Let me escape and get away. But if you go in there with a planning to feel something, over time, it reduces. You go into the same situation, and when that same condition is there, where you're doing something that you didn't want to do, the shame is, oh, it was only a few seconds, or it was only a few minutes. It didn't last the whole day. It didn't ruin my week, my month. And I have people who, the shame could ruin many, many days. It lasts a long time. And progress is often seen when they say, yeah, it happened, and then I moved on. It didn't bother me much. And I go, yeah, that was shame. And it's so different when you go into the situation and you're hoping not to feel shame. You're hoping, let me hope to be, let me hope to order fluently. Let me hope to not feel anything bad. Let me hope this person is not thinking anything negative about me. Let me hope that I don't get a negative reaction. And that kind of hope leads to feelings that are unwanted. And I think that's the scenario that can change. And so that's why I love planned assignments to feel something. And
Mhm.
people say, well, so when I do that assignment or I plan to feel X, whatever that feeling is, plan to feel frustration, plan to feel incompetent, plan to feel um, that this person will never understand, whatever it is that they identify the feeling. Um, um, if I, if I forgot what I was gonna say, but the idea is that you want to go in planning to feel that. Um, and oh, that's what I was going to say. They often ask me, so what should I do when I do that assignment? Like, should I open Stutter or should I, no, you don't need to do anything speech wise. The assignment is good enough to feel a feeling. And I'm wondering if people actually think that that's speech work, that
Mhm.
to feel a feeling is a success,
Mhm.
or to think a thought is a success.
Yeah.
My favorite assignments, actually.
I think it's hard unless you see it as the root or the deeper
Yeah.
driver or piece to what our physical response is and why. And so I think that's the key connection there in understanding why would you plan to feel? Because that seems crazy. And also it's not going to feel good to plan to feel shame, right? You're not going to feel like, oh yes, I'm feeling this shame. This is lovely. No, I I decided I was ready to feel this degree of it here in this space, and as many different parameters as you could talk through and plan for, okay. And I'm tolerating it. I don't love it. I don't even need to like it. I'm tolerating it. And why am I tolerating it? Because the more I can get to a place of greater tolerance, and maybe that greater tolerance becomes feeling a little bit net neutral about it, hopefully. I mean, I think I'm not, I don't want to plant the expectation that someone needs to love the experience or feel inherently positive even, but we're getting to a place where we're just dialing it back. um,
Yeah. And I think that I've heard this mostly from people who are telling their stories and recounting some of the work that they've done. They will look back and they're certainly talking about it like I rarely feel shame anymore. But they're going back and telling the stories of how they worked on it, and
mhm.
they will say things like, um, I did it, and then I
Yeah,
went back to my car and I cried.
yeah.
And that's not unusual. That's not unusual, but just to hear that
Mhm.
is so helpful for people who actually do that and they allow themselves to feel that feeling and they do go back to their car and they cry.
Yes, I remember a whole car ride home from telling my college boyfriend that I stuttered. Which I won't go into those details for the sake of a YouTube video, but I remember a whole car ride home calling my friend Roisin and crying. I I would love to have that phone record because it was at least an hour.
Yeah.
And we were just, she was like, and yeah, and it was, and it was such a release. It felt terrible um in the moment, but the perspective shift you get with time, and then also just allowing yourself to have the release and allowing it to suck. There's got to be an allow to suck time parameter
Yeah.
on some of this.
Yeah. And considering change as being as allowing yourself to feel feelings, that's change rather than blocking them out with an escape or an avoidance behavior,
Mhm,
or blocking out the feeling by masking and playing a role or whatever you do.
mhm,
Just to be authentic in the moment and feel a feeling as you're connecting with somebody in conversation, and sitting with that feeling. Um,
yep.
and it, like you said, it doesn't always feel great, but it is certainly on the path of change.
Ultimately, when we are masking, aren't we deeper down masking or keeping ourselves from feeling that kind of unpreferred feeling at the root anyway?
Yeah.
And so we think of masking as what we're doing to avoid showing stuttering or avoid whatever, but we're really avoiding putting ourselves in a position to feel a certain thing. And so if we're really on the path to decreasing avoidance for the sake of greater spontaneity, joy, efficiency, all of the different parameters, ultimately that's what we need to demask.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Doesn't it always come down to that, as simple as all that, Sarah, that concealment is really about suppressing the feelings that we feel and the thoughts of others that we predict,
mhm,
um, and just assuring ourselves that that's not going to happen because I'm not going to let it happen.
mm,
The ultimate control,
yep,
the
taking your
ultimate
power
control.
back from giving it to a listener that you know nothing about,
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah.
making a lot of assumptions about, but yet has been the metric of success for so long, the listener.
Yeah. And it all comes down to letting go of control, doesn't it?
Yep, it
Sort
does. It does.
And it's so hard to let go of control,
Mhm.
because people actually think that they have control over what other people think. There is this illusion that you can control it. Um,
Mhm.
and I think ultimately letting go of some of that control is the biggest steps toward action that people can take along the journey.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
At some point, we're just going to do a whole thing on control. We'll have
Yeah,
a whole conversation about letting go of control.
definitely.
Yeah. What do you think, Sarah? Do you think time to get another cup of coffee? What do you think?
I think probably I'm still only on my first one of the day, and I definitely need a second.
Okay, let's leave it like that. I think we gave people a little bit to think about in
Great.
understanding the journey of making change and taking action. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any closing that you think might be particularly helpful? Because I
I
know.
think, yeah, my closing thought would be, certainly permission to feel feelings and permission to think thoughts
Mhm,
and giving that permission to others
mhm,
um, as you make changes and as you approach action. And that you don't always hit it right, as you mentioned, you don't always hit it right. But preparing yourself um, for good outcomes is a good way to navigate the road. But sometimes there are potholes and pit stops and curves in the road that you can't predict.
mhm,
And um, over time, um, you develop resilience so that you can bounce back and continue to take
mhm.
chances. That would be my. How
Yeah.
about you? Anything?
Yeah. I mean, it was just changing as you were saying that. I think I think mapping the journey and understanding where we are, not invalidating that because we're looking ahead and feel like we have a long ways to go, and mapping the journey as not a direct path. Like, let's map it as if we're traveling the Northeast corridor of 95. You're you're going to get rerouted. You're going to hit a lot of traffic. You're going to experience times where it's a little bit more stressful. And then there's going to be some easier freeways within that too. And I think mapping the journey and understanding the magnitude of that, but that understanding the outcome towards the end, maybe there's no finite end, but the latter part of the journey and understanding your why, because we've been clear about intentionality and what you're doing and how it's supporting that is important.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
love it.
love
Okay.
it. Let's get another coffee.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.